Good morning to everyone. My name is Emilio Dalla Torre. I'm an 18-year-old student who is very honored to be here today. The first thing I want to say to start is that we live in a society which is driven by information. We are surrounded by information in every day of our lives. And we have the possibility to come across every type of data we want when I say, pick up our phones, or maybe we get on the net and we do a Google research. So we have all the tools we need to understand how much is important the environment and how much is important our contribution to protect it and to improve, in fact, our behaviors to avoid, in fact, creating some damages that, in our small way, can be irreparable for the environment. I say this because I noticed that a lot of people who say that they are concerned by the environment too often doesn't know how should they work on themselves to prevent, in fact, their bad behaviors. So, how is it possible that in a society of information we don't have the information to do such important thing? I think it's because it doesn't exist a way to inform us on which are the real problems and the practical solutions that we could take on with. So, my project that I want to talk about today is One a Day. It's a simple application that I developed for mobile phones that is aimed to provide the user an advice per day that is useful to help everyone to reduce, in their small way, their carbon footprint. This is because if we don't believe that we have the power to change things, we will never be able to change things. Thank you.
Welcome to Seeds and Chips 2019. I'm Morgan Oliveira. I'm the founder of Grounded PR in New York City, specializing in communications for food tech companies. Thanks for joining us for today's panel. I'm going to introduce them now. First, we have Antonella Santilli, Head of Sustainability for Enel Green Power. Fengquan Mei, Professor, Steering Committee of the High-Level Panel of Experts on Food Security and Nutrition. Veronica Magli, Social Impact and Sustainability, the Bloom Project. And Dirk Hendrickson, Co-CEO of Treasure 8. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Can we go down the line and maybe you can give a little brief overview of what you do and your role?
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Maybe, can you hear me?
No, get the microphone, yeah.
Does it work? Yeah. So good morning, everybody. So I'm Antonella Santilli, and I'm the head of sustainability in Enel Green Power, which is a leading renewable company.
I'm Professor Mei, and from China.
Oh. Hi all, I'm Veronica Magli, the Social Impact and Sustainability Manager of Bloom Project.
Hi, I'm Dirk Hendrickson. I'm co-CEO of Treasure 8 out of San Francisco, and we're a food tech company that focuses on turning food waste into nutrition.
Dirk, why don't we actually start with you? Can you go into a bit how you at Treasure 8 are working with large companies to improve food security?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a excuse me, that's a good one. So I've been in the CPG industry myself for many years and just made the move to the entrepreneurial side of life. So it's been a great journey. So now being the co-CEO of Treasure 8, I see a lot of opportunity to work with the CPG industry in a variety of ways. Firstly, commercially, secondly, financially, and thirdly, in the area of innovation. So I'll elaborate a little bit on each of those areas. Commercially, obviously, every company needs to grow, and growth is hard to come by these days. So looking at an ecosystem of partnerships is interesting for CPG companies, but also is important for the entrepreneurs to get to scale. So commercial collaboration is step number one. Number two is financing. A lot of the CPG companies these days are setting up venture firms or equivalents thereof, and are interested in helping these smaller companies grow and be in an earlier stage involved with them. So we're looking at that as an opportunity to bring them in to help support us financially. And then thirdly, and that's probably most importantly, it's in the area of innovation. And the way I like to have those conversations is through the lens of the short term, the midterm, and the long term. So we're able to work with CPG companies to provide them with short-term solutions for their innovation pipeline, products that can go on the shelf fairly instantly because we've done the heavy lifting. But we're also able to work with them midterm on their R&D agenda. So let's say a CPG company has a 3-year strategy and innovation pipeline they need to develop. They have certain areas that they need to work on or want to focus on based on their consumer insights or other. We can help them with that R&D agenda. And then thirdly, from a long-term perspective, there's a lot that we can experiment with, not necessarily grounded in a hardcore briefing, but innovation that comes from companies like us because we're at the front end of experimentation. I call it, throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And that can go into the longer term pipeline. And combined with an investment in smaller companies like ours, that can be very interesting and ultimately profitable for these companies. Profitable in 3 ways: profitable financially, but also profitable socially in terms of the social impact we can help them generate, as well as profitably environmentally because of the reduction of environmental impact that we can help them create. So the triple bottom line.
We weren't seeing this 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, compared to 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a higher sense of purpose that is trickling through in larger organizations as well. Many entrepreneurs, at least in our sector, are kind of sustainability natives. So we come at it because, we want to do the right thing. In our case, it's turning food waste into high density nutrition for folks who need it for whatever reason. For CPG companies, many of them started that way, but some of them have lost their ways a little bit over the years, but there's definitely a trend that they want to go back to that. So having that conversation about the purpose, why are we here? Why are we potentially working together other than making money, is a conversation that's happening more and more. And that's an exciting space to be because that connects humanity and creates a lot of possibility.
Totally, thank you. Antonella, what does Energy Company have to do with the sector of food and water? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I will try. So first of all, let me thank Seeds&Chips for giving me the possibility to share with you some thoughts. And in a traditional way of considering value creation within the private sector, considers that the more you are focused or specialized, your mission, your business is focused or specialized, the more you will create value. So from this traditional perspective, may seem a little bit paradoxical at the best, that an energy company is interested in food and water. Now I work in a green power, leading renewable company. So our business, our mission is to develop, build and operate renewable power plants. So what we have to do with food and water. Now we should maybe focus on electrification, which by the way we are. But from this narrow perspective, in my opinion narrow of course, if you focus only on electrification, then you may be caught up in a problem. The many users that could benefit the more than 1 billion people that unfortunately we know lack energy access. So these many users, potential users, are the same that for which this electricity is too costly. So now, if electricity is not only an economic goal for a private company, but is also an instrumental right, which is a right, a mean for people to have access to basic human rights such as education, health, food, and water. If you consider electricity also under this perspective, then it may have sense for an energy company to focus on productive use of energy, so direct energy to irrigations, to pumping, to refrigeration, and in this way, maybe contributing in accelerating human development.
Thank you. Feng-Quan, you've been in this space for a long time. Can you speak to some of the changes and the sense of urgency that you've seen in recent years to improve food and energy? Yeah.
And food and energy is very important from China and the United Nations. In the past 4 years, the steering committee of high-level experts group and of World Food Security Committee, United Nations, have been working for writing suggestions for summit of the United Nations. This report is on the global food and nutrition system. With food consumption is increased and energy also increased. In China, we have adopted many methods increase the energy resource in multi-energy. Coal and electric and biology energy, just supporting the food security and the food safety and other important questions.
Thank you. Veronica, can you explain a little more about the work Bloom Project is doing and its role in creating impact in these spaces?
Yes, I also want to thank Seeds&Chips to inviting us in this such an important panel. And Bloom Project is a startup that aims to provide innovative and low-tech systems for a sustainable agriculture. So my colleagues and I, we have the missions to fight the malnutrition all over the world, to optimize the use of water resources, and also to increase the economic power of agriculture, and also the resilience of communities to natural disasters and environmental shocks. And we do this trying to combine the scientific research with a sustainability and scalability approach, and social business, of course. And we started in 2018 with our first prototype named Agri Tube, and we developed this first prototype in collaboration with the university, an Italian university, the University of Padua, with the DAFNAI department. And Agri Tube basically is a system that starts his activity from the hydroponic technology, but with a low-tech technology runs by solar power. So basically, we only have a solar pump that pushes water in a closed circuit in which there are roots from vegetables, and of course this water contains nutrients. And so it's of course an impactful system to give everyone the chance to produce food and fresh own food by themselves, no matter where they live.
Got it. Very cool. Dirk, we're seeing more and more about food waste in the news. This is something you guys are focusing on a lot. Can you tell me, do you view this as a problem or more of an opportunity, and how come?
Both, right, is the obvious answer. And I'm laughing, but I shouldn't, because I want to start with the problem. The problem is huge. There's $2.6 trillion of food wastage in the world. And that's a huge number that includes over $500 billion in societal costs and even more in environmental costs. So it's not just the monetary, the direct measurable monetary aspect of the waste, it's also the social impact, the environmental impact, and we'll talk, I guess, a little bit later about that. At the same time, there's almost 1 billion people that don't have access to food, and even more that don't have access to quality food and quality nutrition. So that's a problem in and of itself, and if you combine these two, that becomes a massive problem that can have massive consequences for us as human beings and every life on the planet, and everything's behind us here in terms of the SDGs, I think, is a testimony to the fact that we're coming to terms with that, and that we know that solutions are needed. And that's where it gets exciting. So that's where it becomes an opportunity. So looking at it from a different angle, food waste is an opportunity. But what it needs to solve for it, in our perspective, what we're focusing on is two critical things. One, a systemic approach, and two, scale. So that's what at Treasure 8 we're designing for. The systemic approach means we're not just looking at, converting leftover carrots into cookies or something like that. We're really looking at the entire value creation chain and what needs to happen to turn that waste in an opportunistic way into what people need. And so we do that going all the way back to the agricultural sourcing and setting up partnerships there, which actually is the hardest part, is getting access to the waste either coming out of from agriculture producers or retailers with leftover produce. Then we take that into processing, so we're developing proprietary technology that at very low cost and low energy cost converts waste into, or excess produce, if you will, into high density nutrition with much higher quality than traditional technologies. Then what we do is we, with our R&D teams, work into converting that into ingredients that can go into the CPG industry so that they can help us scale that, because we as a small organization can't do that. So that's where the ecosystem of partnerships comes in, and that is critical. And then the third step is converting those ingredients into products that people actually need. Not always, not only what they want, but also what they need. So providing the nutrition lens to it, making sure that we're focusing on improving the quality of the nutrition around the world. And that has two components. It's providing access to nutrition where people currently don't have it, and typically that's in developing or underdeveloped parts of the world. But also in developed nations, access to quality nutrition. I'm Dutch, I live in the United States, and I observe a lack of access to quality nutrition every day, even in a rich part of the United States, being San Francisco. And that has all kinds of dire consequences if we don't watch out. So that's how we look at it.
Thank you. Antonella, how far off do you think we are from cleaner energy being used by a majority of home users versus vice versa?
Well, now, not to be pessimistic, but on one side, we all know the SDGs, the Paris Agreement. Many countries have been working towards this agreement, but on the other side, there are some figures and facts. I don't know if you know that today, renewable energy is about, now, figures are always changing, but to give you the dimension, 2-3% of the total energy generated. So we are quite far off in a way, even if, we are progressing. And yeah, I would say.
So in years?
In the years, it depends on a few things. It depends, of course, on the government commitments. It depends on markets and how they will develop. And it depends also on, I don't know, certainly consumers. But one thing that we are seeing over the last few years that can give us some optimism is that many big companies are being organized under the, I don't know if you know, the RE100. This is a global alliance for companies that are committed to go 100% renewables. So there are many companies, there's Google, Coca-Cola, but many companies that are now already 100% renewables or are going and committed publicly to it. And of course, there is also, sorry, I'm mixing a little bit things, but it's quite a big issue. Maybe later we can talk more about this. There is also the technological aspects. Of course, as you know, renewable are intermittent. So one of the issues is, how do you get more renewable into the grid, which does not like really at the moment intermittent sources. There is the digitization of the grids has been going on a lot, and of course batteries also are the next frontiers. Actually, we are the real frontier now that can help develop renewables.
Thank you. Veronica, can you talk a little bit about the importance of companies working together to improve some of these verticals here?
Yes, I think that nowadays companies have of course a huge role in development. And for example, in the past, I think that it's already the past, we talked about corporate social responsibility. But I think that nowadays it's better talking about the role and the impact that companies can have into the reach of SDGs, because we have also to change our words, And for example, in my experience and in Bloom project, of course, now we are a startup and we look to partner with companies all around the world. And it's such important, and it's really part of our business model. We started our history, and thanks to the big donors, to the development funds, etc., etc. But in this second stage, we really want to partner with the companies, and I think we have to orient all our partnership in this profit, no profit deal. It's important.
Thank you. Feng-Quan, the UN came out with a report this week that we're at risk of losing 1 million plants and animals to extinction, and humans are to blame. Do you think that we can reverse the damage, or is it too late? What do you think?
Biodiversity.
Yeah, you hold the microphone.
The biodiversity is very important, especially in the past 50 years. The biodiversity was reduced quickly. We have to adapt and make and efficient policies for protect the biodiversity, and especially special animals and even space and fishes and other biology. We need to adopt cooperation, global cooperation in different countries, different area, making common the policies, the efficiency, method, and the policies.
Are you seeing any policies coming about, and where? Are you seeing what countries are leading the way on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In China, and as our steering committee, of a high-level expert group, in the past 4 years, we have written the 2 reports. The one report is a global food and nutrition, especially food security, and protect the environment and protect biodiversity. In China, also each year the government report write these important policies for protecting biodiversity.
Thank you. I know we talk a lot about food waste and its implications to the environment, but Dirk, can you talk about how it can lead to conflict in certain parts of the world?
Conflict. Yeah, I think there's many ways into that question. I think there's 2 that stand out for me. One is migration and the other is health, each with their follow-on implications. Obviously, not having access to food or clean water or a combination of both leads to increased migration patterns that we see all over the world with the dire consequences that has. And let's face it, primarily for the folks who are migrating, right, who have to leave their homes because, and their countries often, their regions, and have to adapt to different lifestyles 9 times out of 10 against their will. So obviously that leads to social conflict as a follow-on consequence of that migration. So that's one. But I also think that closer to home, not having access to quality nutrition leads to health issues. And health issues have their follow-on consequences, not having equal economic opportunity, for instance, because people are not healthy and can't participate in the economy or can't go to school. Personally, I've done a lot of work in Africa over the last decade or so, and the implications of this topic that you mentioned on the life of girls and women in communities are very significant because it prevents them from participating in a productive society. And that leads to conflict as well, right? Inequality, by and large, leads to conflictual situations, and whether that leads to global conflict or not, we'll see. But definitely, we're planting the seeds. No pun intended. This is not such a great seed, right? For global conflict to become worse. We're certainly not helping reduce it if we don't work on waste and access to quality nutrition.
Did you want to say something about that too? No? Okay. Did you want to say something on that? Antonella, what are some of the biggest hurdles you see for renewable companies to continue to make an impact? And what can be done to propel their work forward?
On one side, I think there is a misconception, general misconceptions that from a market point of view, renewable energies are more expensive than traditional sources. This is false. Now, renewable plants are, generally speaking, more competitive than new traditional plants, but also, in some cases, more competitive than existing traditional plants. So this misconception can, of course, be an obstacle in developing the market. Another, generally speaking, problem could be regulations in some areas, in some countries. I think, generally speaking, the sector, but certainly my company can speak for my company, we do not look for incentives or subsidies because, as I said, renewable energies are competitive. We don't need it now. But what a company needs generally is a stable regulatory framework. So when there is a stable regulatory framework, it's enough. So that could be another thing in some areas that could be developed. And I was thinking also before what consumers maybe, so we have the private companies, the states, what could we do? It's not really an obstacle, but maybe it's something we can do for renewables, if we believe in renewables, is maybe ask ourselves, by which or from which energy what we buy is made. I mean, when we buy whatever products, do we worry about the energy supply? What kind of energy supply is this product produced from? It could be something interesting to push the companies to be more renewable.
Veronica, we're facing a crisis with a lack of farmers in the U.S. So at an all-time low. I just read it's the UK's most dangerous job. What can we do to, one, increase the number of farmers globally, and two, make the profession safer?
Okay. Oh, I can start from, of course, Bloom Project's experience. And I think that it's important to focus on technologies. For example, in Bloom Project, we work in rural areas. So in rural areas in Africa, we have off-grid communities. So we have to think to produce without electricity. And it's for that we thought about a system made with the really frugal innovation. And it's for that we use a solar pump, and that can be activated only by solar power. And this is the first aspect. The second one is that through the technology we can have a more accessible and inclusive system. And because, for example, in Brew Project we can include also disabled people, because it's a so flexible technology. And at final, I think that to increase the impact of agriculture, starting from hydroponic, we can diversify the cultures. So we can optimize the impact, economic and social, of agriculture.
Thank you. Dirk, the UN just came out, the EU just came out with a new report that they're changing how they're going to be measuring food waste at each step along the supply chain. And it's such a hot topic. But why do you think it took us so long to tune into this? Or were we just sleeping?
Your guess is as good as mine. But I think when I think about that, again, I think of two things. One, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, right? So I think that it's been in the works for a long time. But these things don't happen by accident. Society and stakeholders are noticing that it's a problem. And the EU clearly jumped into action, better late than never, I would say. The second thing, and I think that's more important, is this notion of you are what you measure. And I just want to elaborate a little bit on that. I think you mentioned it early on that we need to move on from corporate social responsibility to, the SDGs and collectively making sure that we do what's right. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we integrate sustainability, how do we integrate the SDGs in the core business models of companies that we work for. Now, for me, it's a startup, but I also did that in large-scale organizations. And doing that requires metrics, because you cannot mobilize an organization and hold them accountable internally if you are not able to measure what you want to change. Organizations for decades, for centuries, have been used to measuring the dollars, measuring the P&L. So if we don't treat societal impact and environmental impact like a P&L and go to a triple bottom line kind of approach, then we're not going to make the numbers. So that's point number one. Point number two is you cannot, I don't think we should expect every organization to pursue all 17 of the SDGs with the same intensity. Organizations can help in areas, companies can help in areas that are important to them. company I worked for previously had a focus on water and women empowerment and reducing its carbon footprint because those aspects were core to its operations. And I think with waste and wastefulness, that's going to be the same. It relates in some way, shape, or form to at least 3, if not many more of the SDGs here. The obvious ones are zero hunger and quality nutrition, but life underwater and life above water, one could argue, are equally important. So if organizations, companies, when I say organizations, I'm a commercial guy, so when I say organizations, typically that means the company. If companies are able to measure that throughout their value chain, and I don't know exactly what the EU has come up with, I haven't read the report, but from the way you're describing it, is it's throughout every step in the value chain, right? That is of critical importance because the value creation chain is as important as the value destruction chain. And companies need to come to terms with both and measure both and manage to minimizing the waste and wastefulness and maximizing the impact through the lens of a triple bottom line. So I think it's a great thing, maybe a little late, but better late than never. And as usual, or not as usual, but as often is the case, the EU takes the lead. Yes, we're late, but a lot of the policies that come out of the EU are going to be prescriptive or somewhat prescriptive to how the rest of the world will approach it. So I think that's a very good thing. Let's get on with it.
Antonella, can you detail a little bit more about how energy can improve food and water?
Okay. So when we look at the nexus between energy, food and water, of course, we consider it especially in developing country and in rural or semi-rural communities. Now, I was saying before, so energy should be conceived and directed to productive use. And in my opinion, it's not really important. I mean, it is, but the problem is not really the technological aspects of it. Depending, of course, on what do you want to supply, if pumps, if refrigerations, if schools, I mean, you have a variety of systems. You have, of course, solar PV panels. You have mini grids, so small generation plant, renewable plants with a self-standing grid, not connected to the national grid. And then something we are considering now, we would like to test and develop, is to, let's say, open an industrial plant also to productive use. What does it mean? We usually build big industrial plants, and we could devote some of the generation of these renewable plants, some of the capacity, to productive use. We call it smart extension, so an extension of the plants to supply local communities living nearby, which, by the way, usually take the burden of this industrial infrastructure, but sometimes, in some developing countries, they do not really take the benefit of it precisely because they are not connected to the national grid, so they are off-grid. So that's a test. We would like to do it. And these are the way of linking food, water, and energy for development, I would say.
Thank you. Feng-Huan, which vertical of food, water, energy would you say is the most urgent for young entrepreneurs if they were going to get started, and which of those do you think is the most important for them to tackle? Which one do you think we need to go after?
As you may know, in China, the water is very important. The water level is 1/4 of world average level. Water is limited to developing agricultural and rural development, including poverty. Therefore, we have adopted advanced irrigation technology and irrigation improvement and mechanism. And we, in the past 10 years, we have learned from experience from Israel. Israel, you know, Israel's irrigation technology is advanced, especially the short water, the countries.
Okay, thank you. One last question for the panel. How do you try to make these changes in your everyday life? So whether that's food, water, energy, what do you implicate into your everyday life, small changes that other people can do? Any thoughts?
On a personal level.
Yeah.
I can start. I have a couple of answers if I can take a minute. The first one is, you know, being a dad and thinking about the next generation. So it starts with the easy stuff that my parents taught me. Turn off the lights in your bedroom in the morning before you go to school, right? Or don't leave the tap open. So the small steps that everyone can take. So that's the obvious one. Then from more of a kind of professional perspective, I've tried to look at the question that you asked the gentleman here about what's more important, water, energy, food. I think it's impossible to really answer that question because the real answer is all of them, and that's why we call it the Nexus. It's all interdependent. So the solutions I think that we need to work on need to be systemic. We need to apply a lot of systems thinking to that. I've done a lot of work in the water space, but I quickly found out that if I only work on water without paying attention to power generation and the sustainability of that, or even connectivity and making sure that, you know, you can manage systems remotely and do preventative maintenance and all that kind of stuff. You need all these utilities. And all of that is related to, you know, keeping people in their communities to make sure that the agricultural sector can actually continue to support a world with 10 billion people over time. So I think it's all connected, and if you ask me what do you do every day, that's kind of the lens to which I try to approach my work. Right now at Treasure 8, the approach is the systemic solution to looking at waste as an opportunity, and bringing in an ecosystem of partners that are like-minded to trying to solve that problem and create opportunity for others. But again, it's through that systemic lens, because otherwise I think that the solutions we come up with are going to be incremental, and that's not what the world needs. What the world needs is massive change, transformational change. We can only do that together, and if we can be an accelerator for doing that, and bringing that ecosystem of partners together to get on with it, then so much the better. So this is an open invitation to the audience in the room, as well as the audience that is watching. Come talk to us if you think that we should look at waste as an opportunity.
Thank you.
Sometimes I've heard about how to have no impact in our daily and also professional life. But I think that it's impossible to have no impact, because always we have an impact. It can be positive or negative, but always with our actions we have an impact on the planet. So, of course, in my daily life, and I think that it's so impossible that all the people, it's so important that all the people in, for example, in this summit, have to pay attention of the problems of resources, of needs of resources, of lack of resources, and we really have to think in a systemic approach. So thinking about where our resources, or the resources that we need, where they come and then we go. And in my professional life and in Bloom Project too, we try to hear from other experiences, and it's so important to share, like we are doing now, to share our opinions and our examples and what are in our mind, and also to learn from the southern part of the world. So it's such important to talk with the the countries in which we are thinking to create an impact. So to share our things about, in my case, Africa, about the think tank in Africa, about the makers, the African makers, because yes, now there's a new equilibrium of also all the forces that we have to put on the table to gain our goals.
Thank you.
Okay. I could say in my personal life that I don't own a car, but then I don't have a driving license, so it's too easy. Although I really believe that you should walk the talk. So I shouldn't behave in an unsustainable way being the head of sustainability. And I'm doing little things, but I don't want to, bother you or annoy you with the small things I'm trying to do. I'm really trying, small on my side. Then there is a thing I believe, and maybe it's too presumptuous, too general, I don't know, I'm sorry, but I think there's something I can do also because I was paid to get knowledge on sustainability, which is very good, is, to kind of, when I have conversations with people, kind of focus on rational knowledge. I think this is something, not only on renewables, on food, on waste, and I agree with you, there is the systemic approach that must be, used, because otherwise we won't go anywhere, but a kind of rational knowledge that respects all different views also. I think this is basic for development. Sorry.
We're going to open it up to Q&A. Does anybody have a question? We have time for a few. All right. Can we get a mic over to this gentleman here?
Thank you. This is for Dirk. So what's your opinion on incineration of waste? Does that play a part at all, or is that not a good thing?
Can you repeat the question?
So what's your opinion on, so a lot of places, they incinerate quite a lot of their waste. Do you think that's so burning their waste?
Incineration,
Yeah,
like to burn.
Yeah. Or is that not a good idea, do you think?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I think some parts of the approach are more developed than others. So what we're looking at is at Treasure 8 is certain types of food waste. So at the source of agricultural growing, if you will, waste that gets generated there, post-processing of those agricultural outputs, as well as leftover waste from the retail industry. So that's where we're building our partnerships, where frankly we're looking for partnerships. What we do with that waste is we look at it as a source of energy that can go three ways. One way is nutrition for people, energy for us, right? Which is what I talked about a lot today. The second way is energy in terms of power that can help us power the machines that we run to process the waste into nutrition. And then what's left over from that process could become biochar or what have you, which becomes energy for the plants, fertilizer in different words, right? So my personal philosophy is waste isn't waste until you waste it. So looking at it as a resource, no matter where it can go, taking that energy and deploying it in ways that make the whole system regenerative and or circular, that is the ideal. So I think my honest answer to your question is, yes, it's important. I think it's a great idea. Not all solutions, we don't have all the solutions yet, and not all solutions will have the same impact. Like the environmental impact of converting waste into energy can either be disastrous or it can be great depending on the solution that you put in place. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. But generally speaking, I think it is something that we definitely need to take into our approach when it comes to systemic thinking and systemic solutions.
Thank you. One more question? I saw a hand in the back over here. Oh, okay. We might have time for two. Let's see.
Good morning. My name is Nele Lauwers. My question is concerning the cities, where you have the food, water, energy nexus very present. And I was wondering, because you came up, or the panel came up with the idea of the systemic solutions, which I support also. I'm asking if you know good examples which are systemic, but also scalable, concerning feeding cities into the food, water, energy nexus.
Who is your question for?
Someone who feels responsible.
I don't know, but I have a question for, I mean, I don't know if I understood the question, because in a city, if you would develop a sustainable way of, for example, producing energy through renewables, for example, wouldn't that be, so the energy would be sustainable that go into the companies processing food, but also the company delivering water. Would that be enough, in your opinion? Sorry, but for the nexus, or were you thinking?
I was thinking of you can have the rainwater captured,
Collected.
you have energy loss from heating, you have CO2 from heating too, so there are a lot of waste streams around. How can you optimize into the food, water, energy nexus, and scalable?
I think that's the goal, right?
Yeah, yeah. As you were saying, I mean, one easy way to go, not really answering your question because it's really complex, not because I don't want to, or maybe I'm not able. That's another question. But is if we apply circular economy, approach to energy, food, water, but also, transportations, then all the waste, and I liked what you were saying, not only the value creation chain, but also the value destruction waste. We could shorten this value destruction, and of course we could do it by collecting rainwater. There are many things, but I'm not an expert, so I want.
So I know it's a complex question, but my question was actually because you're all working on the topic. Do you know somewhere an example, maybe already small, but which is an eye-opener and makes the discussion something concrete or visible? Just a question. No. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we have time
Sorry.
for one more quick one. Oh, you want to?
Yeah, I have an example. For example, now we are in the field to recycle waste, also in hydroponic, in a really small, familiar hydroponic system. And it is possible. We are now in touch with the company, and you are during the experiment, and it's possible to recycle waste and put nutrients in waste, and so to have a circular system of hydroponic. This, I think, can be an application.
Well, we're pretty much out of time, so if you had questions, maybe you can talk to the panelists directly after. I want to thank you all for joining today. I think it was a really good conversation. And thanks everybody else for coming to listen. So.